Welcome, Jet fans, to another episode of Jets Life Podcast. Um, Here we are. We're a few days away, 3 days away from the start of the legal tampering period in NFL free agency. We're getting this thing rolling. We're just going to go into some of these positions again here and just go through an idea of what it would look like if the Jets were really aggressive, as they should be, in an all-in window, and we're able to make some additional moves here to try and get this thing set up in the right direction. Um, First thing I want to call out is just that this week is a pretty big week overall in the NFL calendar. I know it's not the start of a lot of action, but it's the week after the combine. Agents, coaches, GMs, we're all in the same place at the same time. It's really the first kind of time where the agents are able to talk to other offices about their clients. It's not legal to talk about it, but discussions happen behind closed doors about potential free agents and what the agents do with that information. They'll typically go back to their client and say, like I used Mike Evans as an example. He was set to hit the open market, would have been an awesome target for the Jets. Didn't work out. He ended up signing with the Bucks. So what probably happened? Just putting this in perspective, um, the agents spoke with other teams. Would you be interested in Mike Evans? Obviously, many teams probably said yes. And when they started talking about digits and how much that would cost potentially, that's information the agent then takes back to his client, says, and I never really kind of saw Mike Evans as wanting to leave Tampa. He's been there his entire career. He's won a Super Bowl there. Um, even had another great season last year. I didn't see it as a opportunity for him to really leave. Um, I know that he's getting towards the tail end of his career. I know he's not a spring chicken anymore, but he's not old by any means either. He could have still gotten a contract from another team, from a Super Bowl contender, but I mean he's living the life down in Tampa. I didn't really see him wanting to leave, but that additional information his client was able to provide to him was able to keep him around and let him stay for longer term. He'll be there for 2 years under a $52 million contract, which I think kind of falls in line with what we were more or less expecting. I thought that number might reach even $30 million a year, and maybe it did. But maybe that comfort of staying in Tampa was enough to forfeit some of that additional earnings he could have had. Um, but nonetheless, just gonna go through a few things here. I already talked about Mike Evans, but a few other targets potentially that the Jets you know, could have gone for once free agency opened up have also been either franchised or snatched up. T. Higgins is one that we already knew about. T. Higgins, I think that was announced pretty early in the week last week. And Cincinnati's in a good situation. They're cap flexible, and they have Joe Burrow there. They have Jamar Chase there. Jamar Chase isn't getting paid like a number one receiver yet. I think they're trying to line this up where when T. Higgins eventually leaves, maybe it's next year, is also the year that they would give Jamar Chase a long term extension, and then figure out the number two receiver at a later point in time. So, big thing there. I mean, it didn't really ever see him as a opportunity to leave. Same with Mike Pittman. It would have been awesome if he would have left Indianapolis. I think that would be one of the first phone calls I would have made if I was the Jets. But again, he got franchised by the Colts. He'll be staying there on a 1 year deal. We'll see what happens over the course of this season if he remains there or not. And then a few other signings that could impact the Jets or will impact the Jets. At this point, they're not going to impact them. They're just not going to be available for them. A couple of guards signed multi-year extensions. Kevin Dotson, who I mentioned a few weeks ago that I didn't think he'd hit the open market, but again, if he did, probably would have been one of the first phone calls I'd made. Solid interior offensive lineman, but the Rams did not want to let him leave. I think he signed a 3 year or 4 year look at my notes here. For him, it was a 3 year, $48 million contract. And then Ezra Cleveland was another option out there. Again, another situation where I really didn't see him leaving his current team. The Jaguars traded for him in the middle of the season, so you would have expected that with that trade they'd probably want to keep him around for a few more years, and that's what they're doing here. 3 years, just south of 10 million a year, 28.5 million. was the contract, so right around 9 million a year there. So that's where we're going there. Big names off the board, um, and we hit this free agency open market. I'm just going to go through each position and kind of how I would expect. I kind of looked at some of the top targets that are available, and I'm not saying the Jets are going to sign um, you know, any of these are, a variation of the group. But I did just want to point out some of the positions that are available, players that are available, and players that I think would fit kind of the what we're trying to do here for the team. So I'll start off with the quarterback position. I know, obviously, we have Rodgers, not a not we're not going for a starter, but as we saw from last year, quarterbacks get injured at an alarming rate. Last year was just crazy how many starters played for not only the Jets but for teams around the league. Um, so I think you're going to see a season this year where backup quarterback becomes a little bit of a priority. So some of these numbers I'm throwing out here may even go a little bit higher. But I look at the two top targets I think the Jets should go at for the quarterback position for backup. And it's going to be a little tough because when you go into a situation where you look for a backup quarterback, sometimes the top tier backups um, want to go to a situation where they see that they could start. Um, Maybe it's a situation with a rookie quarterback. The team may not be ready to kind of like if you look at teams like New England, Washington, um, or the Bears, a situation where more likely than not, one of those or those teams are going to draft a quarterback. Are they going to start the quarterback day one, or is it something where maybe one of these top quarterback says, "Okay, I go to that team. I'll start the year, and hopefully I keep the job. If not, maybe the rookie takes me at some point, but at least I have the opportunity to start from day one, unless the rookie proves otherwise." But these targets here, Jacoby Brissett, who last year signed a contract with the Commanders, $8 million a year. Um, I think Jets can go right around that with him. Maybe it goes up to $10 million a year again in the situation where a team, either doesn't have an option with one of these rookies or wants to go with him to start the year, get the rookie comfortable, and then eventually have the rookie take over. And then probably a more likely option would be the second here, Gardner Minshew. One, I think it's more likely because I think Jacoby Brissett's just proven that he can start in this league over a duration of time and play pretty consistent football. Not going to win you a lot of games, but he'll win a couple of games like a backup should. Come in there and bring some stability in the midst of a loss of a quarterback. Gardner Minshew has kind of proven that kind of effort mentality a little bit here. I mean, he's kind of a gunslinger without kind of going crazy. So I think that that's probably a more likely option for the Jets. It's not a sexy pick at all, but I think it's a situation where they need that backup quarterback position filled. And if Brissett signs with another team, you got to kind of pivot to one of the next best options. And I think that next best option would be Gardner Minshew. Plus, it would come at a much reduced contract. When you look at last year's numbers for the contracts that these two players signed, Jacoby Brissett was around 8 million per year. Gardner Minshew was able to get down to 3.5. If that number does spike up a little bit, I think you're still looking at Gardner Minshew at no more than 5 million per year. Maybe you push it to 6 for this situation, but I again, it's a situation where you'll have the backup quarterback situation figured out. Don't have to worry about it. At least if all else fails, has to miss some time. At least you have somebody who started a bunch of games, played well in different teams, and was able to kind of keep the ship afloat. Had the Colts on the brink of a playoff appearance last year until the last couple of games kind of went out of hand. So Jets would have more than happily taken that last year, but unfortunately, that's the past. So yeah, I kind of stick with one of those areas here. Go with a reliable backup quarterback option, and those are probably the best two options. Feel free to comment. Leave me any of your suggestions. I know obviously other guys are available, but these two I think kind of fit what we're looking for. Just a short term resolution behind Aaron Rodgers. And then I know there's a huge Um, should the Jets draft a quarterback? I'm not one that's entirely in favor of doing that this year. The Jets have very limited draft capital, but that's a conversation for another day. But with the limited draft capital, the earliest I can see the Jets going with a quarterback is the fourth round, unless something crazy happens where there's a guy in the third round that just no one expected to be there. But quarterbacks are a rare commodity. They don't slip too far if they do slip at all. Um, so I'm not really looking too much into the Jets drafting a quarterback in this draft. Yeah, it's a conversation for the 2025 draft. But for this year, get your free agent backup quarterback and let's get to work. Um, Next position we're going to touch on here. I think a big, probably one of the bigger needs the Jets need to address in free agency. I know offensive line's a huge need. Don't get me wrong, but chances are you're not drafting a receiver in the first round. That's why you do need to make it a priority in the opening window of free agency to get one of these top targets. And as I mentioned earlier, that list is shrinking and shrinking by the day. It seems like, and with the limited kind of options that are available, you got to kind of go with one of these top two guys. Can't go into a season with a guy that you think is a third option at best. I know Tyler Boyd's name's been thrown out there. I know Curtis Samuel's out there. These guys are options that would be um, like Tyler Boyd. I look at as a perfect example. There's two top 1A, 1B receivers in Cincinnati. He comes in as that third option and gets a lot of targets because the other guys are getting kind of covered and he's open and able to make plays. Um, I don't really see him fitting here with the Jets because the Jets right now, as we currently stand, have a number one receiver in Garrett Wilson and a bunch of number threes and number fours. They need a guy who can be a legitimate second option behind Garrett Wilson. And that guy I kind of look at here, there's a couple of guys. Calvin Ridley would be one of my first options here. But the issue with Calvin Ridley is that, as I mentioned earlier, that wide receiver list is kind of shrinking by the day. As that list shrinks, it puts a higher need on the free agents that are available. And Calvin Ridley, although he's not been great with Jacksonville, I know he had the 1 year there, still has that skill set to get open, which is something that the Jets have on the other side with Garrett Wilson. I just wonder how the team feels about the potential of a guy that does basically the same thing on the other side that Garrett Wilson does. I personally am all for getting a receiver who gets open on the other side. I don't think there's an issue with complementary players. I understand you want a big body down there in the red zone. Maybe there's a situation where Alan Lazard gets basically figured out and can get open a little bit more than he did last year. Maybe having Aaron Rodgers back is just going to bring out that whatever he had in Green Bay. Which let's not sit here and act like he was a great player in Green Bay either. He's not an again not a number two receiver. He was brought in here to be that. Judging by the Jets' moves, maybe they put a little value into getting Odell Beckham signed last year, which didn't end up working out. Obviously, he signed with the Ravens. But Calvin Ridley coming here opposite Garrett Wilson would absolutely be exactly what this team needs. I look at a guy like Hollywood Brown, takes that little step down from what Calvin Ridley is. But when you look at the numbers these guys are going to get, it's going to be up there. I think Calvin Ridley is probably going to get around $20 million per year. Um, Similar to the number, the franchise tag in the current year. I think that's really what he's gonna look at, and he'll probably get it because there's like I mentioned earlier, there's not many options if a team is looking for a top target, for their quarterback. Um, Calvin Ridley is gonna sign for around $20 million a year. It may even go more than that. If there's a team that's really desperate, they might even kind of push it a little bit further. I look at a few years ago when the Jaguars signed, Christian Kirk. I don't think anybody saw the numbers that he signed for, um, kind of being what would actually happen. And he ended up signing, I think it was around 17, $18 million per year, which nobody would have expected. And that's what happens with these receivers because not many become available. The few that do end up signing monster contracts. And I think that's definitely going to happen here with Calvin Ridley. And the same with Hollywood Brown too. I think when you look at Hollywood Brown as a, I don't necessarily see him as a 15 to $20 million player, but I think he's going to get around $15 million a year on the open market. And it's just unfortunately the way this thing works. When you don't figure this thing out in the draft, the Jets have had many opportunities. Um, I mean, obviously they figure out Garrett Wilson, but there's been a lot of players that the Jets have picked in the second rounds, and just have never able to figure out. Denzel Mims obviously being one of um, the biggest stories there. Um, Guy we picked in the second round, never developed. Elijah Moore, whatever happened there, the Jets couldn't figure out a way to get him in the ball in a way that made him happy. End up forcing his way out. So there's been definitely multiple options to figure out that receiver position. On the opposite side, Garrett Wilson. Unfortunately, just none of those plans have worked to this point. So yeah, look at the Jets to make a early phone call to one or both these guys. A situation where they settle for a guy like Boyd isn't one that I'm hugely in favor of. Obviously, when you look at a guy like Calvin Ridley, he's probably gonna get calls from the teams with with openings at number two receiver. I look at a team like the Buffalo Bills, who have Gabe Davis as a free agent. Gabe Davis, another potential target for the Jets. I just, again, a guy like Gabe Davis, he's a good player. I just don't. I think his name is going to bring him more value from a contract standpoint than what I think he's actually worth. He might end up being one of those players that you look at and say, "Wow, how did he sign for that much money?" But his name is kind of it's out there. Sometimes what happens in this league is that players with names end up signing contracts. Players without the big names and probably a little bit more productivity don't sign for as much. But the good teams find those players and are able to, bring out more than what other teams are able to do. So the situation where the Jets find themselves, I don't really trust this offensive staff to bring out the most in in players like that. Curtis Samuel, for example. I mean, he's kind of he would be a good player. I could see him kind of fitting kind of again a number three type of role on this team that could probably garner more targets and stuff like that. But do you really trust, based on what we saw last year, that this coaching staff is going to get the best out of players? I think it's a situation where the Jets need the players to bring the best out of this coaching staff, and that's why I think it's imperative on the offensive side of the ball for the Jets to really go striking at the top of the charts with this free agent market. And then on the defense side, you can play around a little bit with the middle second tier players, and hoping that they develop, because the defensive staff has proven to be able to develop players. Um, but anyway, yeah, Calvin Ridley, um, Hollywood Brown, one of these players I think needs to be on the team. Again, for what I mentioned earlier, they get open, and I think that the play calling can, you can get away with poor play calling when you have good players on the outside. Is kind of my thing there. Not glowing endorsement, obviously, for this coaching staff, but I think it's the best thing the Jets can do at this point. Um, Possession doesn't get talked about enough, and again, I'm not going in any particular order here. I'm not saying, like, obviously, I'm not saying backup quarterback is the top need here. I'm just going down the line of the offensive positions and what I want this team to do with at each of those spots. And I'll go quickly on running back. I think it's pretty obvious we have a number one running back on this football team, but we don't have a true number two running back. Izzy Bonaconda, I know we drafted last year. Um, didn't get enough playing time on the field. It's a big question mark there. Dalvin Cook was a failure of a free agent signing. I really like the Jets to kind of play around with this running back market, bring in a guy or two that you can see that can carry some load off of Brees Hall, because there's not a situation here where the team could be successful if Brees Hall is the only player that does anything in the running game. We saw it last year. Jets basically force fed him the football that last game of the season against the Patriots, because that was the only thing they can do on offense. Everything else was just basically, I know there were a few plays made in the passing game, but nothing significant. Everything that happened in that game was, on offense at least, was surrounded by what Brees Hall is able to do. That's not a situation I feel overly comfortable with, just because he is coming off of a major knee injury last year. You still want to, limit his touches as much as possible. You want to give him the ball in structure plays. Um, and give him a breather. That's the most important thing. You know, when you gas a running back like that, one, it opens the opportunity for another injury, and two, it's just too much of a workload. Things have to open up in the running game a little bit more, and it will. I believe with Aaron Rodgers there, obviously, and if you bring in a number one, number two receiver to go on the outside, Garrett Wilson, obviously teams have to respect the pass more than they had to do with guys like Tim Boyle and Zach Wilson throwing the football for your team. So I think things will open up in the running game, and that would make things a little bit easier for Brees Hall. But another option to make things a little bit easier, couple of running backs here. I know that there's bigger guys out there, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, to name a few, Saquon Barkley. I know that there's big names out there, um, but I think these guys are going to get pretty lofty contracts. I look at the contract that um, Dalvin Cook got last year for some of these guys. Um, Which, I mean, when you look at that, if Jets were able to give Dalvin Cook that money, maybe they can give it to one of these top guys. But, I look at a guy like Eckler, I don't think he thinks that his career is over. I don't think a lot of these top tier guys are going to want to be the secondary guy. I think they're still going to want to get to an opportunity where they'll be the number one running back. So I look down the list a little bit here, and I think you got guys like um, DeAndre Swift, who throughout his career has been kind of a complimentary running back. The issue there a little bit too is I think you're kind of, you know, the Jets would still need a bigger back, like a bigger body back, like for short line gains. I think Brees Hall can do it. But again, you want those situational running backs. I mean, the perfect teams have complementary running backs. They'll have a guy that can do it all. They'll have a guy that's good in the passing game. They'll have a guy that's solid in short yardage situations. Obviously, the Jets still need to address the short yardage situation if they bring in a guy like this. Um, and then another guy too, J.K. Dobbins. I mean, when you look at what's happening with the running back position in the NFL, I don't see these guys getting monster contracts by any means. I think especially J.K. Dobbins coming off of an Achilles injury and working with Aaron Rodgers, maybe there's a relationship that built there. Maybe Rodgers able to kind of talk to him because no matter what, Dobbins gonna have to come back on a prove it deal. He's not gonna get a multi-year contract coming off a major injury. Teams are gonna play it safe with him. He'll probably end up signing for around like a 1 or 2 year deal, and I think it's probably just gonna be a 1 year deal. He'll want to prove it for 1 year and then hopefully go into the next free agency market and get a little bit more money. But you can probably get Dobbins right now for about a year for $2 to $3 million, and I think that would be a huge deal. Dobbins has proven to be a pretty good running back in this league. Just hope he can stay healthy and keep things moving along with this offense, and I think that'd be a good compliment to Brees Hall if the Jets were able to do that. Obviously, the medical is going to be important there. See how far along he is with his recovery. But he did a lot of his recovery with Aaron Rodgers. So I think Aaron Rodgers has a little insight there to what was going on. Now we get to the beef of the offense and where the Jets are going to spend a lot of time, not only in this free agency period, but throughout the entire offseason. It's going to be imperative that they figure this thing out because anything short of completely figuring out this offensive line is going to be a complete failure on the season. We saw what this offensive line did last year. Again, we know what this offensive staff has kind of proven in this past year without Rodgers. Maybe with Rodgers, it's a little bit of an upgrade there, but the most important thing is keeping Aaron Rodgers upright and giving him time to survey the field and get that ball to one of these monster playmakers that hopefully they have on the outside, pairing with Garrett Wilson. Um, so when you start at the offense tackle position, obviously, you know, it's a situation. First off, good offense tackles never really make it to the open market. So when good ones do, there's usually a reason behind it. I mentioned in my last pod the story behind Tyron Smith with his injuries, um, and he wants money. Um, that's the reason he's leaving Dallas. He wants money for sure. Jets are going to come in with one of these offensive tackles, and I look at not it's not a promising list at the offensive tackle position. Every player that's there has flaws. Trent Brown from the Patriots has struggled to stay healthy. Same with Tyron Smith. The reason that I would give Tyron Smith kind of a little um, little edge over the other offensive tackle guys that when he is on the field, he's still a mountain and still, just an elite offensive tackle. And the Jets need that. Uh, Um, they're gonna. It's gonna be very interesting how they handle the situation. Because I think going into the draft, you would like to have your offensive tackle position figured out. You don't want a situation like they did last year going into the draft where basically everyone knew the Jets were going offensive tackle and that was going to be it. Um, so when it got to that point, three offensive tackles were off the board. Pick 14, team knew if I want an offensive tackle, jump over the Jets and I'll get him. And that's exactly what happened last year. Jets can't really have that this offseason. I still think no matter what, the Jets are going offensive tackle pick number 10. Um, but if you do not figure out the left tackle spot, you put yourself in a situation where you have to potentially trade up a few spots. And with the limited draft capital I mentioned earlier, it's not a favorable situation for the Jets to be taking additional resources to move up. Um, but unfortunately, they put themselves in this situation. They've failed to figure out this offensive line. That's why we need three new starters. So I find a situation where they have no choice but to kind of go into this offseason and get one of these top left tackle players. You can get away with needing a right tackle because there's a lot of players, slotted within the first 20 picks that can play right tackle. So if you figure out the left tackle spot, maybe you get lucky with a guy like Alt or Fashanu slipping a little bit to where you can go grab one of those guys. Um, but more likely than not, you're gonna have a guy like Talisa Fuaga, and even he may not even be available, who plays primarily right tackle. Um, or you find yourself in a situation where if those three guys are gone, if you were able to figure out the offensive line in the offseason, maybe you could go with a pass catcher. Maybe you could go with a guy like Bowers to help shore up that. Um, you know, you don't. The only answer to the question of getting playmakers is not wide receiver. They can address it with a tight end. I just think that's a luxury pick that the Jets don't have that luxury at this point in time. But yeah, Tyron Smith. And then the other option I'm going to throw out there, I don't know if I mentioned it already or not. The other option I would mention is Jonah Williams. Um, Again, here's a situation where I think he's best suited to play right tackle. So I think you find yourself in a situation where if the Jets can't get um, Tyron Smith, they probably pivot to a guy that can play right tackle, um, and then go into a draft and do their best to try and get up there to get a guy like Alt or Fashan who and make that your left tackle and figure out the both sides of your offensive line. I know Vera Tucker, Joe Douglas said in a recent press conference at the combine, can play four positions. I think in an ideal world, he's a guard. And then from there, I think the next step is he's a right tackle. Um, I don't think you're using his skill set to the best if you're making him a left tackle. Not that he can't play it. He's played it in the past. He's played it well, but I think that the answer for Vera Tucker, ideally, would be you figure out the two tackle spots and then keep him on the inside, and then the rest will figure itself out. But the biggest thing here, Tyron Smith, figure out the left tackle spot, and I believe truly that once you figure out that spot, the rest of the offensive line you kind of it all kind of works its way out. Um, if they figure out the left tackle, you can play around with Vera Tucker. You can move into right tackle. You can keep him at guard. If you draft a guy in the first round, like I'm thinking they will, you have both tackle spots. You have Vera Tucker, you have Tittman, and then it's just a matter of figuring. And I think Vera Tucker would actually move to the left side in this scenario. And you just figure out the right guard spot. I look at a few years during the 2009-2010 season. The Jets had that entire offensive line figured out. They had Brickenshaw Ferguson. They had Nick Mangold. Um, they signed Faneca one year, and then I think it was Damian Woody. And then it was just a matter, okay, who's going to play right guard? Oh, okay, we'll put Brandon Moore. And he ended up being a great player during his career with the Jets. I think if your one weakness on the offensive line is right guard, there's enough good offensive linemen that just do the dirty work well enough, and not trying to kind of put offensive line in a spot, but there's enough talented football players that surrounded by good players can figure it out if they're playing right guard. Um, but I mean, obviously, you want to fill as many positions as possible. Tyron Smith, Jonah Williams being the two options. I think you're probably looking at a situation where Tyron Smith contract hits that $10 million number on a 1 to 2 year basis. And then Jonah Williams, I think just the nature of him being probably one of the better um, right tackle options, probably ends up getting close to around 8 to 9 million. I think that'd be a little bit of a stretch there, but offensive linemen don't hit the free agency. I think it's similar to wide receivers. You kind of get shocked when an offensive lineman's there, so much so that they get huge money. Um, Moving along, get to the offensive guard and center positions here. If you've watched previous episode, you know that I have basically kind of put everything into the Jets getting Lloyd Cushenberry to play center for this team. Doing that really gives you some flexibility on the offensive line. You really have the ability to kind of move that entire right side of the interior offensive line outwards. You can bring in Cushenberry to be your starting center. Titman would be your right guard. Baratucco would be your right tackle. You still need to figure out the entire left side there, obviously. But I think that kind of falls a little bit hand in hand with what I was talking about earlier. And going into the draft, if you do address right tackle, then you have an entire offensive line figured out. Um, Obviously, being able to figure out the left tackle is going to be imperative in that whole plan. Um, and then another option here on the offensive line. I don't see the Jets doing this 100%, but um, Tyler Biotish of the Cowboys being out there, play center. He's a veteran, played center for a lot of years in this league, and has played to a good, overall been a solid player. He'll probably get around a 2 year contract, probably similar to what I was mentioning earlier, around $7 to $8 million a year. Hasn't been a great player, but he's been a good enough player. Um, would kind of fit the mold. I just don't think that I don't think the Jets would move Titman over to right guard unless it was for a clear cut, um, you know, top 5, top 10 caliber center. That's why Cushenberry kind of fits that mold for me. Biotish doesn't really, but um, if the Jets find themselves in a situation where they can't figure out the guards, then I think you find it, or even the tackle positions, I think you find yourself in a situation where they may have to kind of mess around with the center position and move the offensive line over. Again, if that's the big upgrade, the Jets make the offensive line, we're talking about a failure by Joe Douglas. This offseason is going to be imperative for him to figure out this offensive line. Um, primary number one, priority number one. But yeah, something like that happening would just be absolutely malpractice, in my opinion. Moving along to the offensive guard position, I think this is one where the Jets can really kind of. It would almost be interesting if the Jets were able to kind of double dip here. I don't think they will. Obviously, you're talking big money in the interior of the offensive line, but it would be an interesting situation here. I look at Michael Onwenu and Robert Hunt. Both these players are, I think, would be just amazing players on this offensive line. We've seen what they've been able to do over the past few years. I think the issue here is that both these players are probably gonna get right around the contract that that we saw handed out to Kevin Dotson. Um, Probably not as much as Dotson, obviously. I think they'll probably be more around the 12, $13 million range, but you're still looking at double-digit million dollars on both these players, most likely. Um, but I look at this situation here. If you were able to figure out both offensive guard positions, you move Veritek to right tackle. You have 4/5 of your offensive line figured out. Obviously, Tippmann playing center. But your biggest hole is the biggest, most important piece of the offensive line, potentially the left tackle. Again, maybe in a situation like this, going into the draft, the Jets would go in and move Veritek to the left side and bring in a right tackle. But I think if you're spending that much money on the offensive line, you're probably not going into the draft wanting to draft an offensive tackle because you probably weren't able to sign a big time playmaker. So So I think in that particular situation, you'd find yourself where the Jets would probably go with a wide receiver, or maybe even Brock Bowers at that point in the draft. Um, Not likely scenario. The one caveat I would say is that Onwenu can play tackle. He would probably be your candidate for left tackle. Again, I think it it's a player that probably plays better on the right tackle spot if he's gonna play tackle at all. But the position versatility, he would be able to do that. Um, Obviously, you know, huge implications on what the Jets do in free agency on what they do moving forward. But I think there's enough beef at the top, and they have the ability to create enough cap room to make it possible. Um, I don't think it's going to happen, but maybe there's a situation where Rodgers or someone is able to kind of take a little bit of a pay cut for the betterment of the team. I don't expect that. Obviously, I wouldn't do it personally. You want to do best for your team, but best for your team on the field, not best for your team financially in most cases. Um, but he's in a win now window himself, so maybe he is willing to kind of cut a little slack. I know he did a big pay cut last year, so we'll see what happens there. So that's how it fixed the offense. Looking at these top tier guys, you have to, in this situation, go with the quality players because you don't know you're going to get quality coaching. We saw what it was last year. Aaron Rodgers does not fix every problem. He'll mask a lot of the problems. He'll make things a little bit easier for everything underneath, but it's just a situation where I just don't see I don't see a situation where the Jets can really go into this offseason, not get some of these bigger guys, and us believe that this offense is figured out. It's gonna be one of those years. I know last year going into it, there was a lot of delirium. Obviously, bringing in Rodgers, we knew what this team was. They were a quarterback away um, from being a Super Bowl caliber, playoff caliber, whatever you want to call it. I personally thought this team was a 12, 13 win team with Rodgers on the field. Um, but after seeing a year of Nate Hack calling plays, it's it's pretty frightening how awful he made this offense look. It looked prehistoric. I mean, it was awful. So going into this free agency market, you have got to address these needs, and you have got to address them with the best possible player. Um, I wonder how Joe Douglas will handle this situation. Um, we've seen in the past, and I don't expect him to just throw money out willy nilly. Obviously, there's a negotiation tactic that happens, but we've seen in the past a lot of players linked to the Jets, and just that final nudge, that final crossing of the finish line doesn't happen. Um, you know, it's been something that's been going on for the Jets for quite some time now. You would just really like it if they can just kind of get these key players, get these key positions, and then do your penny pinching, do your you know your negotiating, strong negotiating stuff. Save that for the defense side of the ball, which we're gonna get to here in a couple moments. Um, Actually, we'll just start there. But yeah, nature of the story, Jets have got to figure out this offensive line, got to figure out this offense as a whole. There cannot be question marks on this offensive staff at all because this coaching staff on the offensive side has many question marks in its own. So from a talent standpoint, the Jets have got to figure it out. Moving over to the defense, I'll start with obviously everyone's favorite subject, Bryce Huff on the edge. It's an unfortunate situation, but when the Jets didn't sign Bryce Huff to an extension in the before training camp last year, when that was not done, there was really never going to be an opportunity to re-sign Bryce Huff. It makes little to no sense from Bryce Huff and Bryce Huff's agent standpoint to have played games midway through the season, not getting a contract extension done, to just not test your market. If the Jets were, and it kind of goes to show potentially where the Jets were at with this whole negotiating. I think they would like to get Bryce Huff re-signed. I think they want him around 14 to 15 million dollars a year, but I think he's going to get 18 to 20 million dollars a year. Someone's going to go crazy. I know he's been a player that played limited snaps, um, so there is that, and there's that common denominator. Oh, Are you really gonna pay $20 million for a guy that's not a 3-down player? So on and so forth. Um, yeah, someone will. Someone's gonna do it. I maybe more around 18 and 19, but I truly do believe that Bryce Love is gonna get a big contract. Enough to where, the Jets just have to let him go. Maybe the Jets do have it out there. See what you're worth. Um, Come back to us, and we'll see if we can match it. If not, best of luck to you. But the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, this week's very important. Teams have spoken with agents about other free agents, whether it's legal or not. It's illegal, but behind closed doors, nobody knows the truth. we The fact that there's been no movement, no rumbling about a contract extension for Bryce Huff tells me that someone's out there that's willing to pay a lot more than the Jets are willing to pay. And he'll sign with that team probably within the first day of free agency. Plays a he plays a position's a rare commodity. He's a pass rusher. Um, so when I look at this, obviously I think he's going to sign for around 4 years, $20 million. Jets, I don't think will match that. They have so many needs on the other side of the football that they don't have the ability to put that into the defense. I think what's going to happen here is I think the Jets are going to take the approach of going maybe a little older, experienced on the edge spot. They have Will McDonald on one side. They have Jermaine Johnson on the other. Maybe they bring in somebody like Shaq Barrett, who has playoff caliber experience, um, has won a Super Bowl with Tampa. Maybe they go Shaq Barrett, who's around 30, 31 years old. Leonard Floyd's another one I look at. Um, Emmanuel Ogba, another player just released from the Dolphins. Maybe they go with one of these guys here instead of paying Bryce off the $20 million. Which, don't get me wrong, I would pay Bryce off. We know what he's done. We know what he's capable of. It's just that the matter of him taking that next step as a traditional, three down player, which doesn't even happen in this defense to begin with. So you'd be getting the same production that you would get from him in this past season, maybe a little bit more because he didn't start getting his snaps until after, I think it was like really after the Kansas City game is I think where you put that like line in the sand, like, okay, he's getting a lot of snaps now. But regardless, yeah, I wonder if the Jets kind of take the approach of we have Will McDonald, we have Jermaine Johnson. Jermaine Johnson, we know is a good player. Just needs to keep progressing in his career. Will McDonald, we don't know, and let's get us some security in case you know what we don't know ends up being not good at all. Which I don't think he's like a complete flame out bust or anything like that. I think we saw he has talent. I think it's just a matter of refining his tools, maybe getting a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. Probably those needs need to be addressed. And I know he's mentioned he's working out with Jermaine Johnson, which would be absolutely outstanding. If he takes the jump that Jermaine Johnson did from Jermaine's rookie year to year two, then I understand why the Jets are open to letting Huff walk in free agency. But regardless, I think that Jets probably end up going with the route of let's get a veteran guy in here who has that ability to reach, 8 to 10 sacks opposite Jermaine Johnson. Let's hope Will McDonald progresses in his career. And those are your top three pass rushers because we do need three pass rushers in the system with constant bodies rotating. That's probably gonna be the way to go. And when you look at it, for 4 years, $20 million for Bryce Huff is probably gonna be the ending contract. You could probably get any of these other three guys for around $10 million a year. Jack Barrett's one I really kind of look at. Um, it's a guy that does his job and does it really well. He is getting up there in age, like I mentioned already, but he's already won a Super Bowl with a Hall of Fame quarterback. He maybe want to take another shot, similar to the kind of storyline we were saying with Mike Evans. Won a Super Bowl as a receiver for a quarterback. Does he want to win another one catching passes from Aaron Rodgers? Didn't end up making it to free agency, so that conversation is null and void. But Shaq Barrett kind of fits that similar situation. He's seen what a Hall of Fame quarterback can do. He knows. I mean, Robert Saleh is a solid defensive coordinator. Maybe he ends up coming here, working with a great defensive coach. On the other side of the football is a Hall of Fame quarterback. trying to cement his legacy and move on with one more Super Bowl ring, maybe that's an option there. Not gonna really mess around too much with the cornerback position. Obviously, we have 3 great corners. I know we gotta figure out, Bryce Hall's a free agent. I think he ends up probably just resigning, unless he gets an opportunity to be a number 2 somewhere else. I just don't see that being, um, the most logical situation for another team, but maybe that's the way it goes there. The cornerback, I'm not gonna really mess around too much. We have 2 solids on the outside. We have a solid nickel cornerback. It's just a matter of getting a 4th guy in there that can probably make a little bit plays. I think the Jets were missing that last year. So again, not going to worry too much about that. Linebacker isn't a concern for me either. Obviously, we have Quincy and we have CJ Mosley. It would just be more depth signing there as well. That's pretty short up. Safety's a big one. Safety is going to be a big position for the Jets. Obviously, we have Ashton Davis, the free agent. We have Jordan Whitehead's a free agent. And then Chuck Clark, who didn't play for us last year, but we did trade for him. I'd like to see the Jets bring back Chuck Clark. Maybe it comes back just understanding the Jets traded for him. Um, obviously the Jets gonna have to pay him, but that's one situation there. Jets do need to bring him because there was you just got the feeling like they were gonna make him kind of play like uh you know like that third linebacker role. And it was just gonna be like outstanding watching him play. But we just never got that opportunity. So I'd like to see what the vision was there, because it seemed like a cool vision when you were at the forefront looking at it. Just never got the opportunity to see what it truly was going to be. Um, but as far as safety is concerned, looking at like true safeties at this point in their careers, um, CJ Garner Johnson and Xavier McKinney. The issue with safeties is that similar running backs, they're getting devalued. I know Garner Johnson signed for about 8 million last year. Xavier McKinney's, I mean, he's a solid player. He'll probably get around 11 million a year. So I don't necessarily feel like he's gonna fit what the Jets are trying to accomplish. I think they're probably gonna allocate a lot more resources to the offensive side, and then try and just make minor signings on the defensive side of the ball. And I don't see them putting a lot of funds into the back end of the defense. But a guy like CJ Garner Johnson definitely fits what I think the Jets need here. Solid safety. I think you can get him for around $8 million a year. I think that's what he signed for last year, on a 1 year contract. Maybe the Jets go that route. But again, I think at that point, maybe he just does similar situation I was saying with Bryce Huff. Um, hey, hey Lions, Jets are offering me $8 million a year. More than happy to come back at that price, and they probably, would entertain that. Um, so safety's position is going to be one of interest for sure. Um, Whitehead's heading out, like I said earlier. So the Jets try and reunite with him. Maybe at a lesser contract. Ashton Davis has proven, over the last couple of years, he's not the player that we were hoping we get with the third round pick, but the Jets have done a lot worse in the third round in the last few years, as we all know. When they're able to get somebody who actually develops, you like seeing keep him around. Maybe Ashton Davis kind of comes back, um, but they'll still be missing like a true free safety. I don't think Ashton Davis fits that. I think Ashton Davis and Chuck Clark are one and the same. Obviously, Chuck Clark at a much higher level, but I think that their roles are going to be very similar. So the Jets would be missing like a free safety type player. That's where CJ Garner Johnson kind of comes in for me. Um, you know, there are obviously other big names available at safety. The Jets go in and like completely, you know, mess things up and bring in a guy like Justin Simmons and say offense do what you want, but this is the elite player that's only available because another team is having cap issues. I look at a situation like this similar to what happened a few years ago with Marcus Williams leaving the Saints. They were in cap hell. They weren't going to be able to sign him. He ends up becoming available. I think I ended up signing him for like 14 million a year. So I look at that contract and compare it to what Justin Simmons could get. The only difference, Justin Simmons is a little bit older than Marcus Williams was at the time. So I don't know that you're necessarily again for that steep of a price, but He plays safety and has played it very well over the course of his career. So interested to see what happens there. And then the last position I'm just gonna really talk about. I know it's kind of gone on for quite some time now, but the last position that I'm gonna talk through is the defensive line position, interior specifically. Um, this is a hole for the Jets. A hole that's not being talked about nearly enough as it should be, because of all the flaws on the offense side of the ball. But defensive line is going to be a big one here. How the Jets address it. I think you look at basically how they kind of approached last year being a similar road here because a lot of the available free agents are still available in this offseason. You look at Sheldon Rankins, former Jet. Does he come back? um, sitting next to Quinn Williams. He had a great season with us. Ended up getting a huge contract to Houston on a 1 year deal. Now he's available again. I think the Jets can get him for around $8 million a year. Calais Campbell, similar situation. Ended up signing with the Falcons at around 8 million, I think it was, or maybe it was around 7 million. I think it was is what he ended up getting finally. And then the wild card. The Jets were in on this guy until he returned to his former team. Fletcher Cox is available again. The Jets kicked the tires on that one last year. Do they kick the tires on it one more time to see if he'll come back over here? Joe Douglas has familiarity with him from being in Philly. Maybe there's a situation where last year was a year too early. This is the right time. Come over here. He signed for $14 million last year. Um, again, it's a big need. I'm not sure if the Jets would do that, but if you get a guy like Fletcher Cox and put him next to Quentin Williams and Jermaine Johnson on one side, Will McDonald on the other, you're talking about a defensive line that's at least the front starters. Talking about a defensive line that has a lot of potential to be one of the top in the league. Um, Fletcher Cox is getting up there in age, so you gotta put that into consideration, obviously too. But I think it would just be a pretty interesting pairing, um, to say the least. But nature of the story is Jets have a lot of holes, mainly on the offensive side of the ball. So I would definitely take some time to get familiar with some of these offensive players because, over the next couple of days, some of these players are going to be on the Jets. I just think that's more than likely than not. And if not, then I just question the direction the team is going in moving forward. Um, Appreciate anyone who's taking time to listen. If you don't mind, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And most importantly, let's go Jets.